The people of Jerusalem and Judah have been taken into captivity. Just a quick little getting you caught up here historically. They've been taken into captivity in Babylon, and there they serve the kings of Babylon. Can anyone remember? You give me one of the 3 dates, years, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded and exiled people from Jerusalem. The one most of us should really know, we should get this, we should put this in our minds. There aren't a ton of dates. By the way, if you don't have, I made some timelines, and I sent them out probably a year or two ago to people who wanted them. If you don't have any of those timelines, let me know. Send me an email. I'll get those timelines to you. I have some key dates on there, key years. Give me a year where the people were exiled out of Jerusalem. Maybe the big one, the one where Jerusalem was destroyed. Does anyone remember the year on that? Oh, man, you didn't even raise your hand. Matt, 586. Thank you for raising your hand. Does anyone remember the other dates? That was the easy one. So I don't have great prospects about you guys remembering the other ones. 602? Really close. We're going to go with 605. We're going to go with, anyone want to try the other one? And these are roughly. So we're going to go 605, we're going to go 597, and we're going to go 586. So, but if you want to remember one that stands out. Remember 586. I don't know how to tell you to remember it. I don't know what number formula you could use that will work for you. But remember, in 586, the Babylonians destroyed the city of Jerusalem and took the people into captivity. That was it happened in 3 stages, 605, 597, 586. Well, they're in Babylon, and they serve the kings of Babylon until another date you might put in your mind that's important is the year 539, which is when Cyrus basically conquers, when he liberates, we use the term liberate, when he liberates Babylon. So remember, when it's before Christ, the years are counting down. Someone said to me one time, they said, man, didn't they know they were only like 500 years away from 539 BC? Didn't they know that in 539 years Christ would come? And didn't they know in like 50 BC that 50 years from then Christ would come? And I was like, well, that's not really how it worked. I really appreciated the question. I appreciated the innocence of the question. They were working off of a different calendar altogether. So it wasn't like, okay, so we're down to the year 1 BC, so Jesus is coming. There was no year 0. It was an innocent question, and it was asked by a person that was really well-meaning. But no, that's not how. As we are counting years down because we kind of like reset the calendar. Okay, not perfectly, but close enough. Well, anyway, in 539 BC, the Persians conquer Babylon. Cyrus, the king of Persia, wants to send the people back home. He wants them to rebuild their temples. He wants their gods to pray to his gods. Can anyone give me just a name of one of the Babylonian gods that Cyrus worships? That he wants gods like the Lord? He wants these other gods to pray to his gods. Can you name me any of the Babylonian gods? Just real quick, throw your hand up and give me one if you have one. Chemosh is a good answer. Chemosh is actually a Trans-Jordanian god of fire. That's a good answer, though, but not one of the Babylonian. I'm sure there's a version of Chemosh in Babylon. Anyone remember any of the Babylonian gods? It's been a few weeks. It's funny because both you guys mentioned Ammonite and Moabite gods, so those guys kind of go together over there in the land of Ammon and Moab, but not one of the Babylonians. Go ahead. What's that? Can you say that again? I'm not sure. Oh, Nebo? Are you trying to say Nebo? If you're trying to say Nebo, then yeah, we're going to go with that. Nebo. We're going to say Marduk. We're going to say Nebo and man, I'm having a brain. Bel. So we have some of these Babylonian gods that Cyrus worships. He wants the other people to go and he wants them to rebuild their temples so their gods can pray to his gods and bless him. Over 40,000 Jews go home. They build an altar. They offer sacrifices. They build the foundation of the temple, and everything is going great but remember, when God is working, Satan is also working. We say Satan's working overtime. That's it's a term that, when God is working, Satan works overtime. Well, God is always, God is over all. God can do anything he wants, anytime he wants. Satan is bound. Satan's going to work hard to try to stop the work of God. And the people of the land, what we saw last week is that the people of the land, they want in on the action of rebuilding the temple. And if you guys might remember, somebody tell me something about the people of the land that want to help rebuild the temple. Brian. The passage says they're enemies, right? They're enemies of the Jews. What else do we have about them? Do we remember anything else from last time about where these people come from? Were they Jews? They weren't Jews. They were brought in by the kings of Assyria up in the north, and they worshipped the Lord and their gods. So these guys were compromisers, big time, and they establish a false priesthood, and they offer their children as offerings in the fire to gods like the gods you guys mentioned. Okay, so Chemosh and Milcom and these guys from the Moabite and Ammonite gods of fire. So it's you're in there. You had the right gods in there somewhere, just for the wrong question. But anyway, these guys were not genuine worshipers of the Lord. But they want to help build the temple because they want to have a say in how things go. They want power and influence. But you might remember the Jews don't want their help because the Jews are not going to compromise. They're not going to allow these idolaters to have a say in their worship. And so they decide to, and this is an important biblical concept, they decide to separate from apostasy in the same way we separate from apostasy. In the same way in our Constitution, our church Constitution, we actually have 2 paragraphs on separation. We have a paragraph on personal separation, and we have a paragraph on ecclesiastical separation, separating from churches of not like faith and practice, apostate churches, and like the World Council of Churches, and like the National Council of Churches, and like the National Association of Evangelicals. In other words, the new evangelicalism and stuff like that, and Pentecostal movement. These guys decide to separate from the compromisers, and no surprise, those people, the people of the land, they turn against them and they discourage the Jews from building, and they try to frighten them, and they hire counselors against them, and they try to stop the work. And they succeed. That's a much longer summary of what I wanted to give, but that's a summary where we are. Now, today we move forward. We move forward quite a bit. We move forward to the rule of Ahasuerus, or Ahasuerus, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He rules from 486 to 565. The temple's foundation was laid in 537. The people are discouraged. They don't continue to build. Then we fast forward to this guy's rule, Ahasuerus. That's about 50 years or so that we're fast forwarding. This guy's also known as Xerxes, for any people who are interested in history. But now in the reign of, we're in Ezra 4, verse 6. Now in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, so if he begins his rule at 486, we're right around 486. Okay, that's what we're going to say. In the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So this king shows up somewhere in the Bible. I'm going to say this. I'm going to call this 1,000. I don't give away 1,000 points like candy. Not that you get anything for it. You don't win any prizes, but this is a 1,000-point question. If you can tell me where he shows up in the Bible. Maybe it shouldn't be 1,000. Maybe it should only be 800, but I think it's 1,000. Then thousands should be given out from time to time. Anyone want to tell me where this guy shows up in Scripture? I think I put too high of a price tag on this one. 800 is probably right. You think it's easier than that? I think names get in the way sometimes. Hold on a second. Let me just see if there's another hand here. Going once, going twice. Oh, Catherine. Yes! And this is the guy who marries. What was your answer going to be? Okay. Wait, you were thinking what? Did you say Ezra? Because if you said Ezra, you're right. We're in Ezra. So technically, you're so far back, I can't hear you. Okay. Catherine has it. Who had it? A couple people had it. And does anyone remember the name of his wife that slighted him? I think this is easier than the 800. I'm going to call this like a 400 or a 600. Go ahead, Sandy. Vashti or Vashti, yeah. And does anyone remember the name of the wife that took Vashti's place? Okay, sorry. Esther. That's really easy. You can't get that one. What's that? Oh, was it Hadassah? Yeah. So anyway, so this is the king that ends up marrying Esther, and again we've moved we've moved forward up about 50 years to from 537 up to 486 in this verse. Now most people don't pay attention to time markers, but those time markers really kind of help us figure out context. Now when I'm reading the Bible, I'm going to be honest with you, and I say now in the reign of Ahasuerus, this is what I think. When is that? I don't know. I haven't memorized when Xerxes ruled or Artaxerxes ruled, or I haven't memorized, although it's fresh in my mind, the length of Cyrus's reign and all these. I don't have all those dates down. So you know what I do is I made time charts, and I pull those up. And I'm like, okay, now I know what's going on. Now I know when we are, and that helps me kind of figure some stuff out. But context is kind of important. You don't want to you could miss the entire context of a passage by not paying attention to time markers like this. But anyway, early in Ahasuerus' rule, the enemies of the Jews, again, later enemies of the Jews, they write an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. And so these people later on, 50 years later, we're in the middle of this passage where they're trying to stop the work of the temple. 50 years later, you have the same type of stuff going on. You have opposition going on. So when Ezra is writing this, when he's recording this earlier opposition that happened during Cyrus's time, 537, reminds him of something that happens much later during Ahasuerus' rule. But it doesn't actually stop there. We keep going into the future. We keep going back to the future in verse 7. And we see more opposition that happens not in the reign of Ahasuerus, but in the reign of his son, Artaxerxes. And in the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam, Mithridath, Tabiel, and the rest of his colleagues wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the text of the letter was written in Aramaic and translated from Aramaic. So now we fast forward even more to the rule of Artaxerxes. So in the beginning of the chapter, now the way I would read, if I'm not paying attention, and early on when I was a relatively new Christian, I'm reading through Ezra 4. I read through Ezra 4. I see the opposition that happens when they're trying to lay the foundation of the temple. And then I read this letter, and I'm like, this letter stopped this whole work from happening. Because look at verse 24, it stops it. And I'm not realizing we've just moved like 100 years through time. So that's why I did last week by itself and this week by itself. So we've jumped from 537 in verses 1 through 5. And then in verse 6, we jumped to 486. And now in verse 7, we jump up to Artaxerxes' reign. And I'm going to say that we're talking about 445 or so. And you'll see why I'm going to say we're right about here. So we've moved in the middle of a paragraph. What's that? 92? Do I have my math right? Is that 92 years? Almost 100 years. All right, if my brain is braining, it's about 100 years. Almost 100 years. All right, but anyway, what happens is we move forward here, and now it's over 70 years after the exiles laid the foundations of the temple, and maybe even more, and this opposition's not stopping. Satan doesn't stop. He continues to come against the Jews. They've come home. The Jews have come home. They've laid the foundation. They're doing what God wants them to do. The work gets interrupted. The enemies come and stop it from being completed, the temple from being completed. And this type of stuff happens in life a lot, where you're doing something for God and Satan steps in and interrupts the work. I'm just going to tell you as a pastor, this happens. This happens to pastors. If you give people the gospel, you know that it happens to you as you give people the gospel. You know that, like, let's just say you're in a group of people and you're giving the gospel. Satan's going to find ways to try to neutralize your witness. He's going to try to find ways to get people angry at you or to get people distracted from the gospel or whatever else. That happens. It happens a lot. When you do what God says, Satan comes against you and the world comes against you, and that's because they're enemies of God and often agents of Satan, even if they don't realize it. In those moments, you need to remain faithful. But these guys, in the days of Artaxerxes, who, again, rules 464 to 424, and I'm arguing we might be somewhere in this range of 445. Which you'll see why in a second. They write a letter to the king of Persia, Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Check out the letter. That's what we're going to focus on for the rest of our time. I know we spent some time dealing with context, but if we don't do that and we just jump into this letter, you're going to think that's something that was written way back at the time of the foundation. We can't mess this up. We got to know we've moved forward quite a bit. We're going to come back, but we've moved forward. Ezra 4:8. Rehum, the commander, and Shimshai, the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes as follows. Then wrote Rehum, the commander, and Shimshai, the scribe, and the rest of their colleagues, the judges, and the lesser governors, the officials, the secretaries, the men of Erech, the Babylonians, the men of Susa, that is, the Elamites, and the rest of the nations which the great and honorable Osnapper. Anyone want to take a guess what biblical king this is? Osnapper. It sounds a lot like Osnapper. It's an Assyrian king. It sounds a lot like Osnapper. Ashurbanipal. You might know the name Ashurbanipal. You might not know the name. It's not the end of the world. If you don't know the name, it's okay. He was an Assyrian king. And the rest of the nations, which the great and honorable Osnapper deported and settled in the city of Samaria and in the rest of the region beyond the river. So we kind of have a little bit, there's a claim of, what's the word when everyone's kind of, solidarity. There's a claim of solidarity. There's the commander and the scribe and their colleagues and the judges and the governors and the officials and the secretaries and the men of Erech and the Babylonians and the men of Susa. That's a major city within the Persian empires. And the Elamites, that's another major region over near Babylon. And all the nations. We're all here. We're all writing this together in solidarity. That's like the general idea, which, by the way, is, I think, fake news. I don't think they really have the support of all these guys. I think they're claiming that they're in unity with all these guys, but I could be wrong about that. I think they're like MSNBC. MSNBC is an absolute joke. If you watch MSNBC, you're just asking to be brainwashed because all they do is lie all day long. And listen, I have Newsmix, I have all these different stations, and there's nobody even remotely close to how bad MSNBC is. I sit there and I'll watch other news, and I just will sometimes just get so angry at how bad MSNBC is lying. I think these guys are probably like modern versions of MSNBC, or as some people call it, MSDNC, right? Is that what they call it? Fake news, big time. They're the worst of fake news. But it used to be CNN, but MSNBC has definitely trumped them in their radicalness. But let's look at the accusation that they make. Whether or not they have the support of these people, we don't know, but they're claiming to at least. Now, this is the copy of the letter which they sent him. To King Artaxerxes, your servants, the men in the region beyond the river, and now let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem. They are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city and are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. So again, understand that the context is much later, and when we see finishing the walls and repairing its foundations, I think we are getting really close to this. Nehemiah rebuilding the wall in 445. We're not there yet, but we're getting real close. And I'm going to argue that the letter that we're about to read is perhaps set the stage for the events for why Nehemiah in chapter 1 is so sad, because of what happens as a result of this letter. So that's why I say we're probably really close to 445. What's really close? I don't know. A year, 5 years, 10 years? I don't know. But close. We're going to say close. But anyway, so we're not in the context of building the temple. We're in the context of building the city walls. And what happens is the people of Jerusalem start to work on the walls, or plan to work on the walls. They had already had approval from Cyrus to do that. But now, if you look at the timeline, we're like 100 years later. And they didn't necessarily get Ahasuerus' approval, and they didn't necessarily get Artaxerxes' approval. And now, under the reign of Artaxerxes, they start building. The people of the land are like, no, you need to get the king's approval if you're going to build. And they write this letter. So we've moved way, way forward here. And notice in the letter, notice how they describe Jerusalem. Rebellious. Is that true? I mean, I guess it depends on perspective, right? They were rebellious against the Lord, that we know. But, the way the nations saw them, they thought of, kings like Hezekiah, who wouldn't submit to the Babylonians and that type of stuff. An evil city. Now, at the moment, these guys are actually following what God says. At the moment, these guys are actually rebuilding the city. They're actually submitting to what God says, and they're submitting to what God says to a certain extent. But what they're saying is what the Lord wants is evil. So they're calling evil good and good evil. If that doesn't remind you of modern news and the modern political situation in America, then you're not really paying attention. But they're like, check the record books, man. Like, check it out. These guys they're going to rebel, and they're not going to pay taxes, and they're going to rebel against you. Now, let it be known to the king that if Jerusalem is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll. And it will damage the revenue of the kings. Like, they're going to rebel, they're not going to pay tax, and the king, you're going to lose money. You're going to lose a lot of money. And so they write this letter as if they're concerned for the king. They're not concerned for the king, they're just enemies of the Jews. But they understand the political situation. They understand how to work with the king. They understand how to appeal to the king to get their will done. You might even say, manipulate the king. Now, because we are in the service of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore we have sent and informed the king, so that a search may be made in the record books of your fathers. And you will discover in the record books and learn that the city is a rebellious city and damaging to kings and provinces, and that they have incited revolt. They have incited rebellion within it in past days. Therefore, that city was laid waste. These guys are rebels, and they're evil, and they're going to rebuild that city, and they're going to take over the whole region, and you're going to lose money, and they're going to incite rebellion against you. That's basically the letter in a nutshell. And if you don't act, look what's going to happen. We inform the king that if that city is rebuilt, and if the walls are finished, as a result, you will have no possession in the province beyond the river. You're going to lose the entire region. These guys are they're going to rebel, they're going to take over, they're going to conquer that whole land, which is obviously an exaggeration because the Jews at that time had nothing. They could barely even survive. But these guys who write this letter, they're liars. They mix some truth in with a lot of lies. And they see faithfulness to the Lord as evil, which, by the way, is how lost and worldly people can be. They'll call people that believe what we believe, they'll call us bigots. That's what they'll call us. And they'll say that we discriminate. They'll say we discriminate against, the genders. How many genders? We asked Alexa how many genders there were today. And what did she say? 57 or something? There's no way to know. There's no way to know how many genders. And I said, because we call it Echo, I'm not going to call it. It's an Amazon Echo. I'm not going to call it by a woman's name or by a man's name. I think we could call it computer, but there was just too many syllables, so I just went with Echo. I said, Echo, I have feedback. You're wrong. And it was completely silent. It didn't thank me for the feedback. So then I asked the question again, and I had the same exact answer. Echo, you're wrong. Your answer is wrong. God created two genders, male and female. And what did Echo do? What did it do? It just shut off. It just was completely silent. Had no response. It was just like, I'm not going to listen. Like, it's so brainwashed, right? They would call us, they would say that we're discriminating against the 57 or 15,000 genders or whatever it is that there are, when we all know that there are two, that God made them male and female. They would say all types of nasty things about us. And they would take your good things and put a negative spin on them and add just enough lies to completely change it, like they did with Charlie Kirk claiming that he was racist, because the Democrats are completely misusing a Civil War Act that makes Charlie Kirk racist. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. It's the work of Satan. And I'm going to tell you, it happens to me as a pastor too. I can't tell you how many times I've had my words twisted into something entirely different. And they don't have to twist it a lot. You just twist it just enough to make something good look like something bad, or just enough to make something good be questionable. And I'm telling you, that's how Satan works. That's how Satan works. But I'm going to say, you call it what it is, and you do it with confidence, and you correct the lies, and you call them lies, and you leave it with God, and you remain faithful in spite of evil people doing their evil work, like what happened with Charlie Kirk. And it is a small thing to be judged by them. It's a small thing. Well, these guys are they're just like the modern fake news that spins everything and lies. And they basically lie about the Jews. I mean, they mix in some truth with some lies, and they make an accusation against them. And the king searches the archives, and what do you know? He finds the truth that they mentioned. And he at least wonders if the lies are also true. So then the king sent an answer to Rehum the commander, to Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their colleagues who live in Samaria, and in the rest of the provinces beyond the river. And the letter says this: peace And now the document which you sent us has been translated and read before me. A decree has been issued by me, and a search has been made, and it has been discovered that the city has risen up against the kings in past days. It's been discovered that rebellion and revolt have been perpetrated in it. It's been discovered that mighty kings have ruled over Jerusalem, governing all the provinces beyond the river, and that tribute, custom, and toll were paid to them. Yes, we found out that these kings have been very powerful. And so they find old rebellion against different kings. Different people who rebelled against different kings is what they find. And that those people were powerful, and he reads history through the lens of the liar, because the well had been poisoned. The water had been poisoned. So he drinks the poisoned water right up, and he reads history through that poisoned water. And he decrees that the rebuilding of the walls be stopped. So now issue a decree to make these men stop. Again, we move forward. They're rebuilding the walls. They're starting to plan to rebuild the city walls. Now issue a decree to make these men stop work, that this city may not be rebuilt until a decree is issued by me. No more work until I say so. Beware of being negligent in carrying out this matter. Why should damage increase to the detriment of the kings? Then, as soon as the copy of King Artaxerxes' document was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their colleagues, they went in haste to Jerusalem to the Jews and stopped them by force of arms. Now, on the negative side, they stopped the work. On the positive side, where is it? They may not be rebuilt until a decree is issued by me. So on the positive side, at least Artaxerxes is open to the idea of revisiting the matter. On the negative side, the work gets stopped. He's been influenced by evil people. He's kind of believed their story, but on the positive side, he's like, I can revisit this later on. And hint, he will revisit it later on when his cupbearer, in only a short period of time, when his cupbearer is really sad, his faithful cupbearer who has an excellent testimony, who he trusts with his life, is really sad about what's going on in Jerusalem, and he changes his mind, and he lets that cupbearer go and rebuild the city walls. And that cupbearer's name, for like 1 point, is Nehemiah. I would have said more than 1 point if I didn't have his name plastered all over the screen for half the sermon. Maybe I would have made it 2 points because it's super easy. But that's why I say we're right around the time of 445. Because the walls have been burned down in Nehemiah's day. Its gates have been destroyed. He's super sad. And I believe that what we just read is very likely the letter that set the stage. And the stopping of the wall is what set the stage for Nehemiah's sadness in Nehemiah chapter 1. Now, this is a great time to jump into Nehemiah. But we still have a whole second half of the book of Ezra. We haven't even finished the first half. The first half deals with a certain time frame. The second half deals with a whole other time frame, which we'll spend time with. But maybe we'll try to come back when we're going to do Ezra, and then we're going to jump into Haggai, and you'll see why when we get there. And then when we jump into Nehemiah, sometime in probably around February, I'll remind you of some of this, so we remember some of that context. But what we've seen is long-term opposition. We saw opposition in 537. We saw opposition in 486. We saw opposition as late as 445, 446 range, something like that. You do the math. That's 100 years of satanic opposition against God's people. And they're successful. For a time. For a time. But each time they're able to stop the work. In today's passage, stopping the rebuilding of the wall. In last week's passage, stopping the building of the temple. In each passage, eventually, God lets the work continue. Satan stops it temporarily, but the work continues and God's work gets done. And in each scenario, things look bad, but only temporarily. In the context of Ezra 4, verses 1 through 5, and then we come back to verse 24. Then the work of the house, then work on the house of God in Jerusalem ceased. Now we've moved backwards. We've moved back to 537. So we moved all the way down through time, and then we went back in verse 24. To 537. That's why the timing of this thing really matters. That's why you really got to pay attention to what's going on. Otherwise, you're going to be really confused. The whole letter was about them rebuilding the city and the city walls. The context of Ezra 4 is the laying down of the temple foundations and the temple itself. And the point Ezra's making is, look at all this trouble. Look at all this opposition. And yes, the work of the house of God in Jerusalem ceased, and it was stopped until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. "17 or 18 years. It was stopped from 537 until around 522, 521, 520. And this isn't going to stop here. Satan's going to come at us again. And Satan's going to come at us again. And when Jesus comes, Satan's going to come at him. And then when he thinks he wins and he murders Jesus, Jesus rises from the dead, and then Satan comes at the church. And he kills James through Herod Agrippa I. And then he kills Peter through Nero, and Paul through Nero. And he kills all types of people. And the work continues, and God's work continues. And Satan continues to come against God and his people over and over and over again. And the point of this week's message is the same point as last week's message, really, is that sometimes Satan wins battles, but God and his people will always win in the end. God will always win. Satan stops the building of the temple temporarily. He stops the rebuilding of the city walls temporarily. He stops sometimes the evangelistic work of the church temporarily, sometimes. He'll bring opposition and hurt the work of the church. He'll do damage to the work of the gospel if you allow. He'll bring division into the church if you allow it. He may distract churches and distract Christians. He may tempt some to fall, and they may do so. He will win battles. Satan will win battles, or at least seemingly win battles, but he can never win in the end. He can never win. He'll be fighting, as Joe mentioned, almost serendipitously. Can I use that word? He'll be fighting until the great white throne, until the final rebellion at the end of the 1,000-year tribulation period. When he gathers up in Revelation chapter 20 and verses 7 through 10, when he gathers up the final rebellion and thinks, hey, I can win, or acts like he thinks he can win at least, and then loses. And what I see in these passages is that Satan cannot permanently stop the work of God. He may be able to temporarily delay it, and that's only because God allows it for whatever reason. But he can't stop it. Not permanently. God always wins. It was true during the days of Ezra. It was true during the days of Nehemiah. It was true during the early church. It's been true throughout history, and it's true today, even now. And God's ultimate victory took place on the cross when he sent his son to die, to take our place, to pay the penalty for sins. And it was very likely what Satan thought was a win for him. I have to imagine Satan thinks that's a win for him. Thought at the time it was a win for him. But it was ultimately a major loss, the biggest loss in history. Satan sometimes wins the battle, but he can never, ever, ever win in the end. Let's take our hymnals and turn to 435. Do we have the numbers right tonight?